The flour dust caught the late afternoon sunlight streaming through the bakery window, and Delilah Norton watched it dance in the air while her stomach cramped with hunger she had grown accustomed to ignoring. She had just given away the last 2 loaves of bread to Mrs. Henderson and her 4 children, who lived in a lean-to at the edge of Wilson, Montana territory. And now her shelves sat bare, except for 3 rolls she was saving for tomorrow's breakfast rush, though she knew full well she would probably give those away too. It was 1878, and the mining town of Wilson had seen better days since the silver veins started running thin. But Delilah had inherited this bakery from her late aunt 6 months ago, and she could not bring herself to turn away hungry faces, even when her own belly echoed with emptiness. The problem was becoming impossible to ignore now, as her dresses hung looser each week, and the coins in her till rarely covered the cost of flour, sugar, and lard she needed to keep baking. She was wiping down the wooden counter when the door opened with its familiar creak, and she looked up expecting another customer with sad eyes and empty pockets. Instead, a mountain of a man filled her doorway, his shoulders so broad they nearly touched both sides of the frame. He had to duck his head to enter, and when he straightened to his full height inside her shop, Delilah found herself taking an involuntary step backward. He wore buckskin pants and a heavy wool shirt that strained across a chest thick with muscle, and his dark hair fell past his shoulders in waves that looked like they had been finger-combed at best. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, but his eyes were a striking pale blue that seemed to see right through her attempt at a welcoming smile. He carried the scent of pine trees and wood smoke, and a large pack was slung over one shoulder that looked like it weighed more than Delilah herself. "You the baker?" His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. "I am, Delilah Norton." She straightened her spine, refusing to be intimidated in her own establishment. "What can I do for you, Mr. Cade Harrison?" He set his pack down with a heavy thud that made her floorboards groan. "Heard in town you make good bread. I do my best." She glanced at her empty shelves and felt heat creep into her cheeks. "Though I'm afraid I'm sold out for today. If you come back tomorrow morning around 7, I'll have fresh loaves ready." His pale eyes followed her glance to the barren shelves, then moved slowly around the shop, taking in details she suddenly wished were less obvious. The flour barrel in the corner that sat nearly empty, the wood box beside her oven that held only a few split logs, the way her apron had been taken in with new stitching because the original ties no longer needed to reach so far around her waist. "Sold out." He said it like a question, though his tone suggested he did not believe her. "Yes, sold out." She lifted her chin. "I run a popular establishment." "Then where's your money?" The blunt question struck her like a slap, and she felt her face flame hotter. "That's hardly your concern, Mr. Harrison. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to close up shop." He did not move. Instead, he crossed his arms over that massive chest and leaned back against her door, effectively blocking her only exit. "Town gossip says you give away more than you sell. Says you're starving yourself to feed half of Wilson. Town gossip should mind its own business." Delilah's hands curled into fists in her apron. "And so should you. Can't do that." He pushed off from the door and moved toward her counter with surprising grace for such a large man. "I don't hold with watching women starve, even stubborn ones who do it to themselves. I am not starving." The lie sat bitter on her tongue, made worse by the way her stomach chose that exact moment to growl loud enough for both of them to hear. His eyebrow rose, and she wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. "Right." He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch that clinked with the sound of coins. "How much for everything you can bake in a week? I'll pay up front." Delilah stared at the pouch. Everything. Every loaf, every roll, every biscuit your oven can produce for 7 days. He set the pouch on her counter with a solid thunk. Name your price. Her mind raced with calculations. A week's worth of baking at her normal capacity would be substantial, especially if she did not give half of it away. But suspicion crept through her initial excitement. Why would you need that much bread? Taking a hunting party up into the mountains. Got 12 men who'll need feeding for a month, and bread travels better than most things. He pushed the pouch closer to her. So, you want the business or not? She should have been grateful. This was exactly the kind of order she needed to get her finances back in order, to buy proper supplies, to maybe even afford to eat regularly herself. But something about Cade Harrison made her nervous, and not entirely because of his size. There was an intensity in the way he watched her, like she was a puzzle he was determined to solve. I'll need half up front to buy supplies. She reached for the pouch, but his large hand covered it first, his palm completely engulfing the leather. I'll buy the supplies. You just tell me what you need. That's not necessary. I can manage my own purchases. Didn't say you couldn't. His tone remained mild, but there was steel underneath it. But I got specific requirements for what I need, so I'll be getting the supplies. You just tell me what and how much. It went against every independent bone in her body to agree to this arrangement, but Delilah was practical enough to recognize she had little choice. If she turned down this order, she might not make rent at the end of the month. Fine. I'll need 50 pounds of flour, 20 pounds of sugar, 10 pounds of lard, salt, yeast, and dried fruit if you can find it. I'll have it here by sundown. He straightened to his full height again, and she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. You eat dinner yet? The question caught her off guard. I fail to see how that's relevant to our business arrangement. That's a no, then. He picked up his pack and swung it over his shoulder like it weighed nothing. I'll bring food with the supplies. Mr. Harrison, I don't need you to feed me. I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself. Evidence suggests otherwise. He moved to the door, then paused and looked back at her. And it's Cade. We're going to be doing business for a while, might as well use first names. Before she could formulate a response, he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click that seemed far too gentle for such a large man. Delilah stood in the sudden silence of her shop, her heart pounding and her mind whirling with confusion. What had just happened? She moved to the window and watched Cade Harrison's broad back as he walked down the dusty main street of Wilson. Other people moved out of his way automatically, though he did not seem to notice or care. He carried himself with the confidence of a man who had never doubted his place in the world, and Delilah found herself both annoyed and intrigued by that certainty. True to his word, he returned just as the sun was setting. This time he carried 2 large sacks over his shoulders and had a basket hanging from one arm. He set everything down on her counter with the same casual strength he had displayed earlier. That's everything you asked for, plus extra. He gestured to the sacks. And I brought stew. The smell hit her then, rich and meaty and absolutely devastating to her empty stomach. Her mouth watered so intensely she had to swallow twice before she could speak. Mr. Harrison, I told you that wasn't necessary. Cade, and yeah, you told me. I didn't listen. He was already pulling containers from the basket, along with 2 tin plates and spoons. You got a table in the back. I'm not having dinner with you. Why not? He looked genuinely puzzled. You got somewhere else to be. That's not the point. I don't even know you. Then dinner's a good chance to fix that. He found her small table near the oven without waiting for direction and set out the plates. Come on, food's getting cold. Delilah wanted to protest further, wanted to maintain her dignity and independence, but the smell of that stew was breaking down her resistance with ruthless efficiency. When had she last eaten a proper meal? 3 days ago. 4. She could not quite remember, and that realization frightened her almost as much as this strange man in her bakery. She sat down across from him with as much grace as she could muster, and he ladled generous portions onto both plates. The stew was thick with chunks of venison, potatoes, carrots, and onions, and the first bite was so delicious she had to close her eyes against the sudden sting of tears. "Good?" Cade asked around his own mouthful. "It's fine." She would not give him the satisfaction of knowing it was the best thing she had tasted in months. They ate in silence for a while, and Delilah tried not to shovel the food into her mouth like a starving animal, though that was exactly what she was. Cade seemed content to focus on his own meal, for which she was grateful. She did not think she could handle conversation and eating at the same time. When her plate was empty, he refilled it without asking. She should have protested, should have said she was full, but her traitorous stomach had other ideas. The second helping disappeared almost as quickly as the first, and by the time she finally set down her spoon, she felt more satisfied than she had in weeks. "Thank you." The words came out softer than she intended. "That was very kind." "Wasn't kind, was practical." Cade leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. "Can't have my baker passing out from hunger before she finishes my order." His words should have stung, but there was no cruelty in his tone, just matter-of-fact observation which somehow made it easier to accept. "About that order, when do you actually need everything? Week from today. That enough time?" "Should be, yes. Though I'll need to start first thing tomorrow morning to meet that deadline. I'll bring more wood for your oven, and more food." He stood and started collecting the dishes, packing them back into his basket with efficient movements. "What time you start baking?" 4 in the morning, usually. "I'll be here at 3:30 with wood and breakfast." "Cade, that's too early. You don't need to do that." He paused and looked at her with those penetrating blue eyes. "You're going to work yourself sick making this order. Least I can do is make sure you got what you need to do it right." There was something in his expression that made her throat tighten. Not pity exactly, more like concern from someone who understood what it meant to work hard and go without. "Why do you care? You don't know me." "Don't need to know someone to see they need help." He moved to the door, basket in hand. 3:30 tomorrow. Be ready to work." Then he was gone again, leaving Delilah alone with a shop full of supplies and a stomach that finally felt full. She sat in the gathering darkness for a long time, trying to understand what had just happened, and why Cade Harrison's gruff kindness affected her so deeply. The next morning, he appeared at her door at exactly 3:30, as promised. Delilah had barely finished washing her face and tying up her hair when his knock came, soft but firm. She opened the door to find him holding an armload of split wood and another basket. "Morning." He moved past her to stack the wood beside her oven, the muscles in his arms flexing with each piece he set down. Even in the pre-dawn darkness, she could see the power in his movements, the easy strength that came from years of physical labor. "Good morning." She lit her lamps, casting warm light through the shop. "You didn't have to bring breakfast too." "Made extra when I was cooking for myself. Seemed wasteful to throw it out." He unpacked the basket to reveal warm biscuits, fried eggs, and thick slices of bacon. "Eat first, then work." Delilah wanted to argue, but she had learned that Cade Harrison was not a man who changed his mind easily. She ate the breakfast he had brought, savoring every bite, while he stoked her oven fire and checked her supplies with the thoroughness of someone who knew his way around a kitchen. "You bake?" she asked between bites of biscuit. "Some. Learned on hunting trips when someone had to feed the crew." He adjusted the oven door, getting the temperature just right, Nothing fancy, but I can manage basics. These biscuits aren't basic. They're excellent." The compliment seemed to catch him off guard. A faint color rose in his cheeks above his beard. "Thanks." They fell into an easy rhythm after that. Delilah mixed dough while Cade kept the oven at perfect temperature and cleaned up after her. He did not talk much, but his presence was oddly comforting. She found herself relaxing in a way she had not since her aunt died, no longer carrying all the weight of the bakery alone. By mid-morning, she had 6 loaves cooling on racks and 4 more in the oven. The familiar smell of baking bread filled the shop, and despite the early hour and hard work, Delilah felt more energized than she had in months. Having food in her belly made an enormous difference. When her regular customers started arriving, Cade moved to the back corner and watched without comment as she navigated the same situation she faced every day. Mrs. Chen came in first, her 3 youngest children in tow, and Delilah could see the hunger in their faces before the woman even opened her mouth. "I'm sorry, Miss Delilah, but could you possibly spare a half loaf today? My husband's still looking for work, and we're running low on everything." Delilah's hand was already reaching for a loaf when Cade's deep voice stopped her. "How much for a full loaf?" Mrs. Chen turned to look at him, and her eyes widened at his size. 20 cents, sir." He pulled coins from his pocket and set them on the counter. "I'll take 2 loaves. One for me and one for the lady and her children here." "Oh, sir, that's too generous." Mrs. Chen's face flushed with embarrassment and gratitude. "I couldn't possibly accept. Not charity. I'm buying bread, and I'm particular about who gets to enjoy it." He picked up 2 loaves and handed one directly to Mrs. Chen. "Your children look like they'd appreciate good bread." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. Bless you, sir." After she left, Delilah turned to Cade with her hands on her hips. "What are you doing, buying bread?" "Thought that was obvious. You know exactly what I mean." He shrugged those massive shoulders. "Can't give it away if someone else buys it first, and I got plenty of money from my last hunting trip. Might as well spend it on something useful." The same scene repeated itself throughout the morning. Each time someone came in looking hungry and hopeful, Cade bought extra loaves and made sure they went to whoever needed them most. He did it with such casual authority that no one could refuse without seeming ungrateful. And by noon, Delilah's till was fuller than it had been in months. When the lunch rush finally ended, she turned to him with exasperation and something else she could not quite name. "You can't keep doing this." "Why not?" "Because it's my bakery, my choice what to do with my bread. And it's my money, my choice what to spend it on." He met her gaze steadily. "You want to help people, I get that, but you can't help anyone if you starve yourself to death first. This way everyone eats, including you." The logic was sound, even if it grated against her pride. "You're a very frustrating man, Cade Harrison. Been told that before." The corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been a smile beneath all that beard. "You want lunch? I'll go get something from the restaurant." "I can make my own lunch." "Course you can. But you won't, because you'll get busy with the next batch of baking and forget to eat until dinner time. So I'll get lunch and you'll eat it and we won't have to argue about it." He was right, and they both knew it. Delilah sighed in defeat. "Roast chicken if they have it, and vegetables." "On it." He headed for the door, then paused and looked back. "For what it's worth, what you've been doing, taking care of people who need it, that's good. Just needed someone to make sure you got taken care of too." The door closed behind him before she could respond, and Delilah stood in the flour-dusted silence of her shop, feeling her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. Cade Harrison saw her in a way no one else had, saw past her competence and independence to the struggling woman beneath. It should have made her angry, being so transparent. Instead, It made her feel something warm and dangerous blooming in her chest. The rest of the week followed the same pattern. Cade arrived before dawn with food and wood, helped with the heavy work, bought bread for anyone who needed it, and made sure Delilah ate regular meals. He did not talk much about himself, but she learned things anyway. He had been hunting and trapping in the Montana mountains for 15 years, ever since he was 18. He had no family left, just like her. He preferred action to words and honest work to empty promises. By the 5th day, Delilah caught herself watching him more than she should. The way his hair fell forward when he bent to check the oven. The careful precision with which his large hands handled her delicate bread pans. The rare smile that transformed his stern face into something almost boyish. She had never been particularly interested in men before, too focused on survival and obligation, but Cade made her wonder what she had been missing. On the 6th day, while they were sharing lunch in her back room, she finally gathered the courage to ask the question that had been bothering her. "There's no hunting party, is there?" He looked up from his plate, and she saw the answer in his eyes before he spoke. "No, why lie about it? Because you wouldn't have taken my help otherwise." He set down his fork and leaned back in his chair. "And before you get mad, I don't regret it. Look at yourself compared to a week ago. You got color in your face now. You're not swaying on your feet by afternoon. You're healthier, and that matters. But you spent all that money on supplies, on food, on bread you don't need." The waste of it horrified her, even as his motives warmed something deep inside. "Cade, that's not right. I got plenty of money, been saving for years without much to spend it on." He caught her hand across the table, his palm rough and warm against her fingers. "Delilah, you were dying. Maybe slowly, but dying all the same. I couldn't watch that happen when I had the means to stop it." His hand engulfed hers completely, and she could feel calluses that spoke of hard work and harder living. She should have pulled away, should have maintained proper distance, but she did not want to. "Why do you care so much? We're strangers. Are we?" His thumb brushed across her knuckles in a gesture so gentle it made her breath catch. "Don't feel like strangers anymore." He was right. Somewhere between the early mornings and shared meals, between his quiet support and steady presence, they had become something more than strangers. Friends, maybe, or perhaps something even more complicated than that. "No," she admitted softly. "It doesn't feel like that at all." The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Then someone knocked on her front door, and Cade released her hand with obvious reluctance. Better get that. The rest of the day passed in a haze of confusing emotions. Delilah found herself hyper-aware of Cade's presence, noticing things she had tried to ignore before. The way his shirt pulled tight across his shoulders, the rough timbre of his voice when he spoke to customers, the protective way he positioned himself between her and anyone who entered the shop, like a wolf guarding something precious. That evening, after they had finished cleaning up and all the bread for his supposed hunting party was packed and ready, Cade did not immediately leave as he usually did. Instead, he stood by the door, seeming uncertain for the first time since she had met him. "Something wrong?" she asked. "Need to tell you something." He ran a hand through his hair, messing it further. "That hunting party lie wasn't the only one." Her stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "I didn't hear about you in town by accident. I've been watching you for weeks." He held up a hand when she opened her mouth to protest. "Not in a strange way. Just, I noticed you walking to market, noticed you buying less and less food for yourself, noticed you getting thinner. Then I asked around and heard what you were doing, giving away bread to everyone who needed it. So you decided to insert yourself into my life without asking." Anger sparked through her confusion. "Yes." He did not apologize or make excuses, "because I knew you'd say no if I offered straight out." Knew you'd rather starve than accept what you'd see as charity. That's not your decision to make, you're right. It's not. He took a step closer, and she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. But I made it anyway, because watching you destroy yourself wasn't something I could do. Call me controlling, call me interfering, but I won't apologize for keeping you alive. The raw honesty in his words stole her anger, replacing it with something more complicated. Why, Cade? Why do you care so much? Because from the first time I saw you, I couldn't look away. His voice dropped lower, intimate in the dimming light. Because your kindness in the face of your own hardship is the most beautiful thing I've ever witnessed. Because somewhere in the last 6 weeks of watching you from a distance, I fell in love with you and I couldn't figure out how to tell you without sounding insane. Delilah's heart stopped, then started again with painful intensity. You're in love with me. Yes. Simple, direct, honest. That was Cade. But you barely know me. I know you give away your last piece of bread to feed hungry children. I know you work until you can barely stand because you take pride in doing things right. I know you're stubborn and proud and so damn beautiful it hurts to look at you sometimes. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in one massive hand. I know enough. She should have been frightened by the intensity of his feelings, by the speed at which everything was moving. But standing there with his hand warm against her cheek, Delilah realized she had been falling too. Falling for his quiet strength, his understated kindness, the way he saw her struggle and refused to let her face it alone. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. I've never felt like this before. Like what? Like I want you to kiss me. His breath caught and she felt the tremor that ran through him. Delilah! Is that wrong? Should I not have said that? Not wrong. His other hand came up to frame her face, and he held her with such careful reverence she felt tears prick her eyes. Just making sure I heard right, because if I kiss you, I'm not going to want to stop. Then don't stop. He kissed her with the same intensity he brought to everything else, his mouth claiming hers with heat and hunger that made her knees weak. She gripped his arms for balance and felt the flex of muscle beneath her fingers, felt the leashed power in his frame that he controlled so carefully. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. That was, she started, then had to stop and try again. That was quite something. We're just getting started. He rested his forehead against hers, his hands still cradling her face like she was something infinitely fragile. If you'll have me, Delilah, if you can accept a rough mountain man who doesn't know much about pretty words or proper courting. I don't want pretty words. She turned her head to press a kiss against his palm. I want honesty. I want someone who sees me, really sees me, and doesn't try to fix me or change me. I see you, been seeing you all along. He kissed her again, softer this time but no less devastating. And the only thing I want to fix is the situation where you're not eating enough. Everything else about you is already perfect. They stood there in the fading light, holding each other and stealing kisses like teenagers instead of adults in their mid-20s. Eventually, Cade pulled away with obvious reluctance. I should go. Let you rest. Stay. The word escaped before she could think better of it. At his raised eyebrow, she felt heat flood her face. Not like that. Just stay for a while longer. Talk to me. Tell me about your life in the mountains. So he did. They sat in her back room while darkness fell outside, and Cade talked about his life in a way she suspected he rarely did. He told her about learning to track and hunt from an old trapper named George who had found him half frozen and starving at 18, running from a past he did not elaborate on. He told her about the peace of the mountains, the satisfaction of living by his own skill and strength. He told her about lonely winters and long summers, about grisly encounters and wolf songs, about a life that was hard but honest. You ever get lonely? She asked when he paused. Used to not think so. Then I saw you, and suddenly I couldn't remember why I'd chosen to be alone." He took her hand again, lacing their fingers together. "What about you? How'd you end up running a bakery in Wilson?" She told him about her aunt, the only family member who had not cut ties when Delilah's parents died, leaving debts that ruined the family name. About learning to bake in this very shop. About inheriting it 6 months ago and discovering her aunt had left her with a building and equipment but very little money. About making the choice to feed her community, even when it meant going hungry herself. "You could have sold the bakery," Cade pointed out, "moved somewhere easier." "I could have, but this place is all I have left of my aunt, and the people here need someone who cares more about community than profit." She shrugged. "Maybe that makes me foolish, makes you good." "There's a difference." They talked until well past midnight, sharing stories and secrets and the tentative dreams of people who had not allowed themselves to dream in a long time. When Cade finally left, he kissed her at the door with a tenderness that made her ache. "I'll be here tomorrow morning," he promised. "Same time." "You don't have to keep doing that. We finished your order." "I know, but I'm courting you now, and that means making sure you eat breakfast." He grinned, the expression transforming his face. "Better get used to it." After he left, Delilah touched her lips and smiled in the darkness. Cade Harrison had crashed into her life like a force of nature, and somehow, impossibly, she had fallen in love with him too. The next few weeks established a new normal. Cade arrived every morning with breakfast and wood, helped with the heavy work, and continued his pattern of buying bread for anyone who needed it. But now there were stolen kisses in the back room, long conversations over meals, and the growing certainty that what they had found together was rare and precious. The town noticed, of course. Wilson was too small for secrets, and the sight of the mountain man courting the baker became a favorite topic of gossip. Most people seemed pleased, though a few muttered about impropriety and moving too fast. Delilah ignored them. She had spent her whole life worrying about what others thought, and it had left her alone and starving. Cade's presence in her life felt right in a way nothing else ever had. One morning in late October, about a month after that first kiss, Cade arrived looking troubled. Delilah knew him well enough now to recognize the tension in his shoulders, the way he moved with more purpose than usual. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately. "Need to take a hunting trip. Real one this time." He started stacking wood beside her oven, not meeting her eyes. "Getting late in the season, and I need to lay in meat for winter." "How long will you be gone?" 2 weeks, maybe 3. 3 weeks without him felt impossible. Delilah had grown so accustomed to his presence, his support, his love. The thought of facing her days alone again made her chest tight with panic. "When do you leave?" "Tomorrow at dawn." He finished with the wood and turned to face her. "I wouldn't go if I didn't have to, but my cabin's up in the high country and I need supplies to get through winter." "Your cabin?" She had not thought much about where he stayed when he was not with her. "You live up in the mountains?" "Yeah, about a day's ride from here." He moved closer, his hands settling on her waist. "Been thinking, though, maybe I don't want to spend winter up there this year." Her heart started beating faster. "No, no," he pulled her against him, and she felt the familiar comfort of his solid strength. "Been thinking maybe I want to spend it here with you." "Cade." She pulled back to look up at him. "Are you sure? That's a big change from your normal life." "I'm sure, been sure since the day I met you." He cupped her face in his hands. "Question is, do you want me here? Because if you say yes, I'm not talking about just for winter. I'm talking about staying, building a life with you, getting married if you'll have me." "Married." The word hung in the air between them, enormous and terrifying and wonderful. "That's fast." "I know. And if you need more time, I'll give it to you. But I'm 33 years old, Delilah." I've been alone for 15 years and I know what I want. I want you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. I want to help you run this bakery and make sure you never go hungry again. I want to build a family with you if you'll have me." Tears blurred her vision. Yes. Yes to what? His voice was rough with emotion. Yes to all of it. Yes to staying, yes to marriage, yes to building a life together. She laughed through her tears. "Yes to you, Cade Harrison, for as long as you'll have me." He kissed her then, deep and thorough and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I'll be back in 3 weeks. Then we're getting married and I'm never leaving you again." 3 weeks, she repeated, trying to memorize everything about this moment. "I'll be waiting." The next morning, she watched him ride out of Wilson on a sturdy mountain horse, his pack loaded with hunting gear. He turned in the saddle at the edge of town to look back at her, and even from a distance, she could feel the weight of his love. Then he was gone, disappearing into the vast Montana wilderness. The days that followed were harder than Delilah had expected. She had grown so accustomed to Cade's presence that his absence felt like a physical ache. But she threw herself into her work, baking with renewed energy now that she had the resources to do so properly. Her till stayed full thanks to Cade's generosity, and she was able to buy supplies in bulk for the first time since inheriting the bakery. She also started preparing for their marriage. It would be a simple ceremony, she decided. Just them and maybe a few close friends. But she wanted to look nice for Cade, wanted to show him she was as committed to their future as he was. So she purchased fabric and spent her evenings sewing a new dress in deep blue that matched her eyes. 2 weeks passed, then 3. Cade had said he might be gone that long, so Delilah tried not to worry. But on the 22nd day, when snow started falling and the temperature dropped dramatically, fear crept into her heart. Winter storms in the Montana mountains were deadly, and Cade was up there alone. On the 25th day, when he still had not returned, she went to the marshal's office. Marshal Tucker was a kind man in his 50s who had known her aunt well. "I need to report someone missing," she said without preamble. "Who's missing, Miss Delilah?" "Cade Harrison. He went hunting in the mountains 3.5 weeks ago. He should have been back by now." The marshal's expression turned grave. "The mountain man. That's concerning, given the storms we've had. Can you send someone to look for him? I'll put together a search party, but I have to be honest with you. The high country's getting impassable with snow. If he's up there, we might not be able to reach him until spring." Spring. The word hit her like a blow. That was months away. "Please try, please." "We will, Miss Delilah, I promise you that." The search party left the next morning, and Delilah waited in an agony of suspense. They returned 3 days later, having made it only part way up the mountain before heavy snow forced them back. No sign of Cade, no indication of where he might be. "Could be he found shelter and is waiting out the storms," Marshal Tucker told her gently. "Man like Harrison knows how to survive up there." Delilah nodded and thanked him, but inside she was screaming. Cade could be hurt, freezing, dying while she stood helpless in town. The thought was unbearable. She threw herself into work to keep from going mad with worry. Every morning she baked, hoping this would be the day he walked through her door. Every evening she stood at her window, watching the street until darkness made it impossible to see. Days blurred into weeks, and Wilson settled into the deep cold of a Montana winter. Christmas came and went. Then New Year. Delilah kept baking, kept hoping, kept loving a man who might never come back to her. The townspeople tried to be comforting, but she could see the pity in their eyes. Everyone thought Cade was dead, frozen somewhere in the high country. Everyone except her. She refused to believe it. If Cade had died, she would have felt something, some fundamental shift in the world. Instead, she just felt his absence, like a part of her was missing. That had to mean he was still alive. It had to. February brought slightly warmer temperatures and hope that the mountain passes might clear. Delilah had just finished her morning baking when the door opened. She looked up from her counter, expecting Mrs. Chen or one of her other regulars. Instead, Cade Harrison stood in her doorway. He looked terrible. His clothes were torn and filthy, his face gone under his beard, and he favored his left leg as he walked inside. But he was alive, solid and real, and Delilah could not breathe for the sudden overwhelming rush of relief and joy. Cade. His name came out as a sob. "Sorry I'm late." His voice was hoarse, rougher than usual. "Ran into some trouble." Then she was moving, flying across the shop to throw herself into his arms. He caught her with a grunt of pain, but his arms came around her with crushing strength, holding her like he would never let go. "I thought you were dead." She was crying now, tears soaking into his ruined shirt. "Everyone thought you were dead. Takes more than a blizzard to kill me." He buried his face in her hair. Though it came close this time. Horse broke his leg in a snowdrift, had to put him down. Then I took a fall and hurt my leg. Couldn't make it back to town, so I holed up in a cave until the weather broke. "Your leg." She pulled back to look at him properly, seeing the way he kept his weight off his left side. "Cade, you need a doctor. I need you." He cupped her face in his hands, and she could feel the tremor in his fingers. "Spent 3 months thinking about you, about what you said before I left. Are you still willing to marry a rough mountain man who can't even manage a simple hunting trip without nearly dying?" "Yes." She laughed through her tears. "Yes, you ridiculous man. But first we're getting you to the doctor, then home where I can feed you properly." "Home." He tested the word, and a smile spread across his face. "That sounds good." The doctor confirmed what Delilah suspected. Cade had broken his leg in 2 places, and it had healed poorly during his months in the cave. He would walk with a limp for the rest of his life, and his mountain hunting days were over. "I'm sorry," the doctor said, clearly expecting Cade to be devastated by this news. But Cade just squeezed Delilah's hand and said, "Don't be. Think it's time I settled down anyway." They were married a week later in a simple ceremony at the church, with half the town in attendance. Delilah wore her blue dress, and Cade cleaned up surprisingly well when he trimmed his beard and put on new clothes. His leg was still healing, but he stood straight and proud when he promised to love and cherish her for the rest of his days. That night, in the small apartment above the bakery that was now their home, Cade held her close and whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" "For waiting. For believing I'd come back." He kissed her temple. "For loving me, always." She tilted her face up to kiss him properly. "You made sure I never went hungry. Now I'll make sure you have a home to come back to. Already home." He pulled her closer. "Right here with you." Spring came, and with it changes. Cade's presence transformed the bakery. His business sense complemented Delilah's baking skills, and together they turned her struggling shop into a thriving enterprise. They hired a young woman named Sarah to help with the baking so Delilah did not have to work such long hours. And they continued their practice of making sure no one in Wilson went hungry, though now it was done in a sustainable way that did not sacrifice their own well-being. Cade's leg healed as well as it was going to, leaving him with a pronounced limp and chronic pain on cold days. He could no longer trek deep into the mountains, but he found he did not miss it as much as he had expected. Building a life with Delilah satisfied something in him that wandering alone never had. In early summer, Delilah realized she was pregnant. She told Cade one morning before they opened the shop, watching nervously for his reaction. He went very still, his eyes widening. "A baby." "Yes, are you happy?" His answer was to pick her up and spin her around, his limp forgotten in his joy. Happy, Delilah, I'm over the moon. We're going to have a family. Their son was born the following February, in the middle of another Montana blizzard. Cade paced the apartment while the midwife worked, and when he finally heard the baby's cry, he nearly knocked down the door in his haste to get inside. "You have a healthy boy," the midwife announced with a smile. Delilah was exhausted but glowing as she held their son. "Come meet him." Cade approached slowly, this man who had faced down grizzlies and survived mountain blizzards, looking terrified of the tiny bundle in his wife's arms. But when Delilah placed the baby in his large hands, something in his face transformed. He looked down at his son with such fierce love and wonder that tears streamed down Delilah's cheeks. "Hello, little one," Cade rumbled softly. "I'm your papa. Going to take care of you and your mama for the rest of my days." They named him Charles, after the uncle Cade barely remembered from his childhood. Charlie for short. He had Delilah's dark hair and Cade's blue eyes, and from the beginning, he was the center of their world. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The bakery thrived, becoming known throughout the territory for Delilah's excellent bread and pastries. Cade proved to be a natural with customers, his gruff demeanor hiding a generous heart that people quickly came to appreciate. And Charlie grew from baby to toddler, learning to walk by holding onto his father's leg while Cade limped around the bakery. 2 years after Charlie was born, Delilah gave birth to twins. A girl they named Diana and a boy they named Christopher. Cade joked that they were making up for lost time, building the family neither of them had thought they would ever have. The apartment above the bakery became too small, so they built a house on the edge of Wilson. Nothing fancy, just a solid structure with enough rooms for their growing family and a big kitchen where Delilah could experiment with new recipes. Cade did much of the construction himself, his mountain skills translating surprisingly well to carpentry. Years passed in a blur of happy chaos. The children grew, the bakery prospered, and Cade and Delilah's love deepened into something rock-solid and enduring. They had their challenges, of course. Cade's leg troubled him more as he aged, and there were lean winters when business slowed. But they faced everything together, their partnership stronger than any hardship. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Cade closed the bakery for the day and took Delilah on a picnic in the mountains. They could not go as deep into the wilderness as he once had, but he found a beautiful meadow with a view of the peaks that had once been his whole world. "You ever miss it?" Delilah asked as they sat together watching the children play. Charlie was 12 now, the twins 10, and all three were climbing rocks with the fearlessness of youth. "The life you had before me, not for a second." Cade pulled her against his side, his arms solid around her shoulders. "That life was empty, I just didn't know it until I saw you. You gave me everything that matters. You saved my life," she reminded him. "I would have starved if you had not intervened, and you saved mine, just in a different way." He kissed her temple. "We saved each other, that's how it works when you find the right person." She turned in his arms to look up at him. Gray was threading through his dark hair now, and lines bracketed his eyes from years of smiling. But he was still the most handsome man she had ever seen, still the mountain of muscle and strength who had walked into her bakery and refused to let her destroy herself through kindness. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too. Always have, from the first moment I saw you." He kissed her properly then, and she felt the familiar warmth spread through her chest. 10 years, and his kisses still made her feel like a girl experiencing her first romance. "Papa, Mama, come see what we found." Charlie's voice rang across the meadow, and they broke apart with matching smiles. "Duty calls," Cade said, pushing to his feet with only a slight grimace for his leg. He offered her his hand and pulled her up beside him. They walked hand in hand to where their children waited, ready to admire whatever discovery had captured their attention. This was their life now. Simple, grounded, filled with love and purpose. Delilah thought about the woman she had been, starving herself to feed others and could hardly recognize her. Cade had kept his promise. She never went hungry again, not for food, not for love, not for anything that truly mattered. And in return, she had given him a home, a family, and the kind of belonging his wandering soul had always craved. That evening, after they returned home and put the children to bed, Delilah and Cade sat together on their porch watching the sun set over Wilson. The bakery was visible down the street, its sign swinging gently in the breeze. Beyond it, the mountains rose against the darkening sky, beautiful and wild and no longer lonely. "Tell me a secret," Delilah said, a game they had played since their courting days. Cade thought for a moment. "That first day I walked into your bakery, I almost turned around and left 3 times before I got up the courage to go inside." "What? You seemed so confident." "Was terrified. Figured you'd tell me to mind my own business and throw me out," he chuckled. "Nearly did anyway." "Why didn't you leave?" "Because I knew if I walked away, you'd die. And I had already fallen in love with you by then, even though we'd never spoken." He turned to look at her. "Couldn't let that happen. So I made myself walk through that door, and it was the best decision I ever made." "The best decision we ever made," Delilah corrected. "I could have sent you away that first day, or the second, but I didn't." "Why didn't you?" She thought back to that first encounter, to the massive mountain man filling her doorway with determination in his blue eyes. "Because I saw something in you. Kindness hiding under all that gruffness, strength that could be gentle, and maybe because some part of me recognized you were exactly what I needed, even if I didn't want to admit it. We were always meant to find each other." Cade pulled her closer. "Two lonely people who needed saving. And now look at us. A bakery that feeds the whole town, 3 beautiful children, and more happiness than I knew existed." She rested her head on his shoulder. "You gave me everything, Cade. We gave each other everything. That's what love is." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged overhead. Inside, their children slept safely in their beds. The bakery was ready for tomorrow's work. The pantry was full, the wood box stacked high, and their bank account healthy enough to weather any storm. They had built something real and lasting, something that would endure long after they were gone. "I'm going to check on the children," Delilah said eventually, rising from her chair. Cade followed her inside, his limp pronounced after a long day but his spirit undimmed. They moved through their house together, checking on Charlie first. Their eldest slept sprawled across his bed, blankets kicked to the floor. Cade picked them up and tucked them around his son with the gentle care that never failed to make Delilah's heart swell. The twins shared a room, Deanna in one corner and Christopher in the other. Both slept soundly, and Delilah paused to study their faces in the moonlight streaming through the window. Her children, hers and Cade's, proof that love could heal even the deepest loneliness. Finally, they retreated to their own bedroom. Cade changed into nightclothes while Delilah brushed out her hair at the vanity he had built for her. She watched him in the mirror, still marveling that this strong, good man was hers. "You're staring," he said without turning around. "I like looking at you." He turned then, and the heat in his eyes made her breath catch. Even after 10 years and 3 children, the attraction between them burned as hot as ever. He crossed to her and pulled her to her feet, his hands settling at her waist, feelings mutual. He kissed her neck, making her shiver. "Every day for the rest of our lives, I'm going to make sure you know how loved you are." "I know." She turned in his arms and kissed him properly. "Because you show me every single day." They made love slowly, tenderly, with the comfort of long familiarity and the passion that had never faded. Afterward, Delilah lay in Cade's arms, listening to his heartbeat steady beneath her ear, and felt completely at peace. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" His voice was sleepy, satisfied. "For not giving up on me. For seeing what I needed before I could see it myself. For loving me enough to be stubborn about it." His arms tightened around her. "Best stubbornness I ever displayed, and Delilah." "Yes. Thank you for taking a chance on a rough mountain man who didn't know the first thing about courting a lady." She smiled against his chest. "You did fine, better than fine. Only because you were patient with me." He kissed the top of her head. "Now get some sleep. We've got bread to bake in the morning." "We do." But she did not feel the dread that used to accompany that thought. Now baking meant standing side by side with the man she loved, building something together, feeding their community while taking care of each other. Sleep claimed her easily, secure in Cade's arms, and her dreams were peaceful. The years continued to pass in a gentle progression of seasons and milestones. Charlie grew into a young man who combined his father's strength with his mother's kindness, eventually taking over much of the heavy work at the bakery. The twins developed distinct personalities, Diana becoming a skilled baker in her own right, while Christopher showed more interest in carpentry like his father. When Charlie turned 20, he married a sweet girl named Emma from a neighboring town, and Delilah and Cade became grandparents within the year. Holding her grandson for the first time, Delilah looked at Cade over the baby's head and saw her own wonder reflected in his eyes. "We did good," he said softly. "We did." She passed the baby to him, watching his big hands cradle the tiny body with practiced ease. "Our family keeps growing, as it should." He looked at Charlie and Emma, young and in love and starting their own journey. "Long as we're all together, that's what matters." More grandchildren followed as the years progressed. The twins married, started families of their own. The house that had once felt spacious became crowded during family dinners, filled with laughter and children's voices, and the kind of joyful chaos Delilah had never imagined in her hungry days at the bakery. She was 52 when Cade had his first serious health scare. The old leg injury that had ended his mountain days caused an infection that nearly killed him. Delilah sat by his bedside for 3 days straight, holding his hand and refusing to let him go the way he had refused to let her starve all those years ago. "Can't leave you," he mumbled through fever dreams. "Promised I'd take care of you." "Then wake up," she told him firmly. "I still need you, Cade Harrison. Our grandchildren need you. So you fight this and you come back to me." He did. It took weeks of recovery, and afterward he needed a cane to walk even short distances. But he survived, and that was all that mattered. They were more careful after that, aware of their own mortality in a way they had not been before, but they had many good years still ahead of them. They watched their children's children grow, saw the bakery pass fully into Charlie and Diana's capable hands, and enjoyed the slower pace of life that came with age. Cade's hair went fully silver, as did Delilah's. His body, once so powerful, grew frail, though he never lost his strength of spirit. On their 30th anniversary, their children threw them a party that seemed to include half of Wilson. People came from all over to celebrate the mountain man and the baker who had become cornerstones of their community. There were speeches about their generosity, their kindness, the way they had taken care of so many over the years. But at the end of the night, when everyone had gone home and they sat together in their house surrounded by photographs and memories, Cade took Delilah's hand and said, "Best 30 years of my life." "Mine too." She squeezed his fingers, feeling the arthritis that made his grip weaker than it once was. Though I hope we have 30 more. Don't know about that. He said it without sadness, just acceptance of reality. But however long we've got, I'll spend every day loving you. They had 10 more years together. 10 years of watching their family grow, of quiet mornings and peaceful evenings, of love that had aged like fine wine into something mellow and enduring. Cade's health slowly declined, his body finally succumbing to decades of hard living and old injuries. The night he died, Delilah was beside him as she had been for 40 years. Their children were there too, and several grandchildren. Cade looked around at all the faces he loved and smiled. "Did good," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "We did real good, Delilah. The best." She held his hand, tears streaming down her face. "You gave me everything, Cade, gave each other everything." His eyes found hers, still that striking blue even in his final moments. "Love you, always have, always will. I love you too, so much." He squeezed her hand one last time, smiled at his family, and then he was gone. The man who had walked into a struggling bakery 40 years ago and refused to let a stubborn woman starve herself to death had finally found his rest. Delilah mourned him deeply, as did everyone who had known him. All of Wilson turned out for his funeral, sharing stories of his gruff kindness and generous heart. But through her grief, Delilah also felt gratitude. She had been given 40 years with the love of her life, had built a family and a legacy that would endure long after both of them were gone. She lived another 5 years after Cade's death, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, still baking occasionally, though her hands were not as steady as they once were. She told stories about Cade to anyone who would listen, making sure her grandchildren understood the kind of man their grandfather had been. On a warm spring morning, Delilah passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by photographs of the life she had built. Her last thoughts were of Cade, of that first moment when he had filled her bakery doorway and changed everything. They buried her next to him, under a tree on a hill overlooking Wilson. Their grave became a place where people came to remember not just Cade and Delilah, but what they had represented. Love that saw beyond surface to substance. Kindness that expected nothing in return. The simple truth that sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is refuse to let them suffer alone. The bakery continued for generations, passed down through their family. And every baker who worked there learned the story of how it started. About a woman who gave away more than she sold, and a mountain man who made sure she never went hungry again. About 2 lonely people who found each other and built something beautiful from their brokenness. Their great-grandchildren told the story to their children, and those children to theirs. The details might have changed slightly with each telling, but the heart of it remained the same. A love story set in the Wild West, between a stubborn baker and a determined mountain man, that proved the right person at the right time can change everything. And in Wilson, Montana, when people spoke of true love, they often thought of Cade Harrison and Delilah Norton, who had shown an entire town what it meant to take care of each other, to see the need in others and meet it without expectation of reward, and to love with the kind of fierce devotion that transcended even death itself.